Hi, Roger. Roger is hiding from you people.
So he watches but does not show himself.
No, well, he was on the show yesterday, so sometimes he shows himself, but normally, yeah, he just show he'll be putting screenshots up during the show. You'll see them magically appear
There's
like
one.
that,
There's
for
another one.
instance.
Yeah, I look over. I have you over to my left, and so every once in a while you disappear, and the magic of a screenshot pops up.
Yep, that's Roger at
It's
work.
magic.
Roger the wizard. All right, are you guys ready to go?
I'm so
Sure
ready.
thing.
Let's
bet.
do it. Here we go. Daily Tech News Show is powered by its audience, not outside organizations. To find out more, head to dailytechnewsshow.com/support. This is the Daily Tech News for Wednesday, November 9th, 2016. I'm Tom Merritt. Joining me, my co-hosts on Wednesdays, Scott Johnson from the Frog Pants Studios, cartoonist, tall man, wearer of beards.
I had to trim up a little bit, though, for my trip to BlizzCon. They ended up putting me on DirecTV, and I had to look a little more presentable than the normal hairy self that I am.
Yeah, no, you're looking good. You're looking nice, and also trimmed up for our guest, Shelly Brisbin, author of iOS Access for All, writer, podcaster, geek for hire, is with us. Shelly, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tom and Scott, and also for letting a beardless person come on the show.
Yeah, no, all faces are welcome on the show,
Very inclusive of you.
bearded or otherwise. Now, Shelly, you've been covering technology and Apple and other things for what, 20 years now, right?
Oh, more than that. It's been a really long time. Back in the 80s, I started doing this thing.
And recently you published your book. We're going to talk a little bit about accessibility in a while, but you should go check it out, folks. iosaccessbook.com. We'll talk about it a little more. Let's start off, though, with our top stories. Google has added a class to its safe browsing anti-malware system called repeat offenders. The way it works right now, if you see those warnings come up, they've occasionally come up for sites that you're like, well, wait a minute, I trust this site. Why are they getting a warning? That can happen for all kinds of reasons, and any site can ask for a review, or if it actually got hacked and had malware, fix the malware and asked for a review. But Google noticed that what was happening is a lot of sites were taking advantage of that to deliver malware. So they'd get the malware up there, they'd get the warning, they'd take the malware off, ask to have the warning removed, and then put the malware back on. So if that happens, Google now will make repeat offenders wait 30 days before the warning can be reviewed and removed. Google defines repeat offenders as sites that repeatedly switch between compliant and non-compliant behavior within a short window of time. And it's not just Chrome that uses this. Firefox and Safari also use Google's safe browsing system to police what's out there.
Yeah, it's the exact quote was, only sites that purposefully post harmful content will be subject to this policy. I hope, and this article doesn't go too deep into this, and neither does Google in any of their responses, but what I hope is that somebody doesn't figure out a way to make another site look like a repeat offender without that site's knowing that that's happening. In other words, I hope this isn't a hackable or spoofable sort of event so that people are caught in some sort of loop where they
like
look
just hack someone, they fix it, wait for a day, and then hack them again, so it looks like they're abusing the policy.
Yeah, that'd be a real bummer if that happens. I mean, look, there's no way to know if that is even possible at this point. Google's one of the smartest companies ever, probably has thought of that, certainly. But it does, it just rings a bell for me, because when you start finding out about, oh, now we have this extra layer of protection, and so if somebody messes up, we're really going to go get them then, and you just hope there aren't any false positives.
And part of this from their perspective is that they don't want to have to continually review things. They're saying this is the 30-day holding pattern, and we'll review you after the 30 days. So if what Scott suggests actually does happen, you could get somebody into a bad spot. But for most cases, until we figure out the way to spoof the spoof, as it were, it seems like it would be overall a good thing. It would certainly make it more manageable for Google. And hopefully that means that their level of ability to get bad actors out of the way would be enhanced. Hope so. Thinking positive.
Yeah, that's the thinking. I mean, for me, I think maybe it's once bitten, twice shy kind of thing for me. I worked for a company where we ended up on blacklists for email usage for no fault of our own. It had something to do with our host and some sort of hack that happened. And getting ourselves off of those blacklists was near impossible. We ended up having to change domains. We had all kinds of problems with that. And while I know that's not the same, that's, you're talking about a kind of a big open standard that lots of services and DNS servers and everybody has kind of a hand in. This is obviously a little more centrally controlled, and Google will probably do right by us, but I don't know. Gives me the whip.
For well-known sites, it's not an issue. It's smaller businesses, smaller sites, places like dailytechnewsshow.com that have to worry about that sort of thing. But yeah, I agree with Shelly. Overall, this is a positive thing to protect us as browsers.
Well, Google's doing other things like this. They just announced Wednesday, that's today, everybody, that it will integrate Google Map Maker features into Google Maps in March and retire the existing standalone app that is currently called Map Maker. Starting Wednesday, edits made on Google Maps will not be available for moderation in Map Maker. Google told Search Engine Land, what a lovely place to visit, go on vacation there, that the change was made, quote, to improve and expedite the map editing experience on both mobile and desktop. Makes perfect sense to me. Put it all in the same place. I have a hard time arguing that we should have a standalone app for this. It makes more sense to make it more universal over the web, via mobile especially. So,
well, you're obviously not one of the map guides then. No, that's my guess here is that there are a lot of folks that Google has cultivated to help them edit maps. Remember, they had that big situation where there was vandalism, and the guides were integral in helping getting that taken care of and getting them back on their feet. And my guess is a lot of them are not happy about this because they've gotten used to the MapMaker tool and its advantages, I'm sure, like any other tool.
That was my question. I don't know anything about MapMaker or the MapMaker community, but something about the way that story was written made it sound to me like there might be a community out there of people who are grumbling about very important but very esoteric MapMaker features perhaps being gone, because I think the story says something about most of the features of MapMaker would now be available in Google Maps. So that most is probably going to cause some folks concern. On the other hand, I just have to say that I love the ability to edit and add things beyond street maps and Google Maps. I've used that as a user many times, and it creates opportunities to make the landscape you see when you're working with Google Maps a lot more awesome. So yay for the map guides, and I hope that they get all that they need in the non-MapMaker version of map editing.
Yeah,
well, I'm with Shelly on that. I mean, the idea that Google Maps should be as extensible as possible and tweakable, and all kinds of weird things happen with it. People make all kinds of crazy stuff with it all the time. I'm all for that. So hopefully this doesn't yank the rug out under some of the more creatives in that space. Maybe some of those people can email us and tell us what that space actually looks like. But
yeah, feedback at dailytechnewsshow.com. If you're a guide, let us know what you think of this.
Yeah.
150 academics and industry experts published the U.S. Roadmap for Robotics last week to help guide the new U.S. Congress in allocating funds. The first roadmap was published in 2009. That led to the National Robotics Initiative in 2011, which budgeted $70 million to advance U.S. robotics research. The latest roadmap recommends things like developing interfaces for manufacturing that don't require training to use, so that it's easy for someone to make the transition into programming these new robots, matching human mobility for things like elevators, stairs, cluttered environments, getting the robots to be able to move around in the same spaces that we can, and estimating users' intent in surgical situations as a safety measure, so that if a command is given in an odd way, the robot can tell, well, that would cause harm if I do that. I'm assuming they mean cut here this way. I know that probably sounds crazy, but apparently, according to this roadmap, that is something that surgeons would like. Technology law professor Ryan Calo of the University of Washington edited the roadmap and recommends the government consider a federal robotics commission to provide deep technical expertise to policymakers. He says it's too early to worry about AI rules yet, but there's a lot of expertise needed to understand what is needed, and why not get that commission underway now, so that when we do down the road need to decide on the ethics of artificial intelligence, we've got a system in place for it.
Well, and this certainly lays some groundwork for what that might look like when we do get to those points. But I was just thinking about the implications of this, and if you came to me 20 years ago and said, somebody's pushing for robotics standards and commissions and starting to think about these things, it would sound very sci-fi, but we are clearly at a place now where this sort of thing is becoming like perhaps electricity was at the time, or radio waves, or whatever new emerging economy affecting sort of, national and international sort of technologies come our way, we have to start thinking this way. So, hey, why not?
No, I 100% agree with you. I don't know if you guys heard it, but on my end, as you were talking about being sci-fi, the audio codec flipped up and your voice went all robot-y.
Perfect.
So the robots approve of what Scott is saying, apparently.
Yeah, I couldn't tell if that was a voice of approval from the robots or not.
I think it's great as well because we complain so much about our elected officials not knowing much about technology, and whether they take these recommendations or whether they get more specific or not, at least the framework will be there and there will be a resource for them, because I guarantee you that if elected officials don't know how to operate computers or mobile phones, they're certainly going to not have any concept of robotics. And a lot of them are frankly going to be afraid of this technology. And whether you should be afraid of a specific element of that technology or not, you absolutely should know more about it. And secondly, it seems like this is driven by the science rather than any specific industrial or commercial purpose, which I always think if you're going to have interaction between the sectors in the private industry that are making stuff and the government, that's the best way to go.
Yeah, the trick in these things is that they're great ideas when they start. And you hit on the first roadblock, which was make sure you get the right people on here. People who just know a lot about the topic and can give unbiased advice. This is how it works. This is what you need. And then the other side of it is to make sure that they adapt or disappear if they're not needed anymore down the road. Not to let it just ossify into something that, I know it sounds crazy, especially given what Scott was just saying, but 100 years from now, like, do we really need a federal robotics commission anymore? And, now that robotics are self-regulated because of their AIs. But this is the moment to start talking about all of that sort of thing. So I'm glad that Ryan Kalo is bringing this up.
Yeah, for sure. Facebook. Facebook. Familiar with their work?
Facebook. Oh, right. Yeah, no, I know.
Right. Rings a bell. Facebook launched a new standalone Android app on Tuesday that sends ephemeral pictures and videos with the ability to put masks on faces. It's not Poke or Slingshot or Instagram. It's called Flash, and it's targeted to markets with weak connectivity. Flash is less than 25 megabytes, 1/3 as big as Snapchat for Android, that is. Flash is available now in Brazil and plans to bring it to other markets. I am a little baffled by the choice of the name Flash.
Best name ever.
Right? I mean, they named an app Paper when there was already an app called Paper, and now they're naming an app Flash?
Yeah. Like, listen, Flash, for all of its whatever, for its storied history, I just don't understand how one that is as argument creating in the tech community as Flash and as much sort of cloud that's been over its aging technology and its antiquated approach to web content, how they would want to just sort of embrace that for a new product that sounds like is a great way to get out there and really put through the slow internet of the world and make things happen. But
yes, one of the biggest bandwidth hogs in history is not what I would have named this after, because I know that we have many Brazilians in the audience and they are familiar with the Flash from Adobe. So it's not like, they're like, oh, well, nobody knows Flash in Brazil. At the same time, name aside, I think this is an interesting effort to beat Snapchat to a market where you're like, hey, we know you guys got data caps and it can be expensive. We're going to get you something that's lightweight.
So now I know why they put it on Android first. It's because the Apple algorithm would have spit it right out of the App Store. Ew, Flash, yuck, won't do it.
No Flash allowed. Yeah.
No, I think it's a great idea too, and I don't feel like I have a dog in this fight. Not only because it's from emerging markets, because it's the kids and the Facebook and the Snapchat, and I think competition is only good for both Facebook and Snapchat, and make it do more things, put more hearts in the room, and put more glasses on people's faces, and do all these various things that both are doing. And I'll just happily sit back and watch and see who wins. The name is the only issue I have with this.
Yeah, no, I agree. And W. Scottus one is like, but they have Instagram. And I guess the reason they want to do a separate app this time is because you want to make it lightweight. And Instagram is not going to be made lightweight.
They're also, Instagram's experiencing this. I know this has been talked about on the show before, but they're experiencing a bit of a renaissance. They've taken the refugees from the Vine announcement. There was already some growth happening there and a pull away from apps like Vine. They're adopting stories and other things from Snapchat and becoming kind of an all-in-one let's go there thing, and they're doing it relatively elegantly. Like, they're kind of getting away with it, and because of that, I always feel like Facebook's just real slow. Rather, I sound like Porky Pig. Slow to want to stir that pot too much and mess with it too much, or give it too much feature creep. Not unlike they do with their existing Facebook app. Like, let it be its elegant thing. Hopefully, it doesn't get too cluttery and weird. Don't mess with a good thing that seems to be on a growth curve, and introduce other stuff in other ways. I think that's kind of their mode right now.
Well, that is a story that is on our subreddit, dailytechnewsshow.reddit.com. And this next story, I probably would not have included in the lineup had I not seen so many people voting it up on our subreddit. Australia's The Age reports that a man named Tim was part of a team that recorded a video of a quadcopter flying through a suburban Australian neighborhood to a Bunnings warehouse store. A note and $10 was attached, instructing someone to buy a sausage and put it in the bag. The sausage was successfully attached to the quadcopter, which was then flown to a person sitting in a hot tub in Sunbury. Australia's Civil Aviation Safety Authority is not amused. They're investigating the incident for violating rules against using an unmanned aerial vehicle within 30 meters of people, outside of line of sight, and over a populated area.
All right. All that aside, I want to be the guy who got the drone to ask and the $10 to go get the thing. I just think this is, I mean, look, I want to respect laws no matter where you live. Those are the laws and you should respect them. And if you don't like them, you should actively work in your community to have those laws changed. But that's an awesome idea. Like it's bringing, can you think of a more fun sausage delivery program than this one?
Yeah. I'm sitting in a hot tub in Sunbury. I want a snag from the sizzle down at Bunnings. I just send my my quadcopter to go get it. Heck yeah. Now, you're right. They're breaking laws, and that's, something people shouldn't do. They did try to be responsible, though. They went and cleared this with the Bunnings folks who make the sausages. Like, are you cool if we send this quadcopter over? Like, they actually took some steps to try to do the right thing. They just didn't do it legally.
Is it possible they just didn't know the regulations themselves? Is the Australian government doing a poor job of letting people know what drone laws are in place and what aren't?
Ignorance is no defense before the law.
Crap.
A snag from the sizzle. I mean, when I was in high school, journalism, there used to be UIL competitions for people who were in journalism. And one of the things you could compete on is headline writing. And this just feels like something that ought to be part of a headline writing contest. Oh my God. I don't know what the headline is, but I feel like it's writing itself in hundreds of brains right now.
Yeah. I love that The Age says, a man who only wants to be known as
Tim.
Tim. There are some who call him Tim, admitted he was part of that. And the fine could be $9,000 for this.
Really?
Which that's Australian dollars, so that's like $1 million.
Wow. That's a
So
lot.
he paid $10 for the sausage.
Yeah.
And $9,000.
Yeah, so $9,010. I mean, he
that's more
overpaid for the
expensive than
sausage to begin
Grubhub.
with.
I mean,
Definitely, yes.
Well, Sausage Tim, good luck to you. On to more Sony-like things. Sony announced Tuesday that it will drop all Viacom-owned channels from its PlayStation Vue service. This starts Friday, November 11th. That is literally this week. That includes channels like Comedy Central, Spike, and MTV. They used to do music videos. Sony also announced the addition of BBC America and NBA TV and the future addition of Vice, as well as more CBS and Fox local stations. One would assume to sort of make up for this, or maybe they were going to add those anyway. But not the first time, Tom, that the Viacom lineup has been controversial in the hands of the likes of Hulu and now PlayStation Vue.
Yeah, man, this is interesting. We are seeing the first carriage dispute, but unlike when, like, say, Dish loses some channels because of a spat with CBS or something like that, this is just Sony coming out and saying, we're dropping Viacom. It's too expensive. We need to keep the cost down, and so that's it. But hey, we're giving you BBC America, so maybe no more Teen Wolf. I don't know, is Teen Wolf still on MTV? But you'll get Doctor Who.
I think it is still on there, like season 4 or something.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea how many people use PlayStation Vue? I mean, not that it matters to the ones that do, because they're losing channels that they want, but is this a service that a lot of people are using?
It's growing. I don't know what the most recent numbers are, but it is definitely growing in an era where cable television subscriptions are declining. But yeah, I mean, that is the question. Like, does Viacom care? Is Viacom making a mistake? Hulu's going to be launching a similar service next year. YouTube's going to be launching a similar service next year. Sling TV still has Viacom, so now they're able to compete on this. Do you still subscribe to cable, Shelly?
I do, for one reason only, because I'm a huge classic film fan, and so I have my Turner Classic Movies that's available on Sling now, so I've actually thought about giving up cable just for that, and so that's a sort of an edge use case. But if it wasn't for that, I didn't have cable for 15 years and was generally pretty happy with it, but then I needed my classic film fix, so sadly.
Do you know about Filmstruck?
I do know about Filmstruck, and I know you guys talked about it last week.
Have you been tempted?
I have been tempted, but when you guys were talking about it last week, you were totally ignoring the classic film element of it. So I was arguing with you as I was listening to the podcast.
Good. That means we're doing our job.
Yes.
Yeah. If anybody doesn't remember, $6.99 a month for the classic films that are the Turner Classic Movie types films, and then I think it's $10.99 if you want to add in the Criterion Collection stuff on top of that. Well, yeah. I think there's more to play out in this Viacom dispute, because there are definitely, I've seen people on Twitter, because we cover this on Cord Killers as well, saying that they are upset by this because there was a show or channel that they enjoyed, especially on Comedy Central, it seems. But also people very excited that BBC America is finally coming to PlayStation Vue, because for some, that was the reason they were with Sling. And the fact that Sling didn't have a cloud DVR was a reason that they wanted to switch, and now they can switch.
It's obviously a subjective opinion, but I would trade Spike and MTV for BBC America any day.
Sure.
But I'm not sure Comedy Central I'd want to trade. So who knows? I know enough people with PlayStation Vue that I get the impression anyway that those who have it really like it, and that it works really well, works as advertised. It's a very Sling-like service, so there's a lot of comparisons to be made there. Huge install base, apparently growing. Why Viacom pulled out is more interesting to me in the sense that, are they making a deal with somebody else, or are we going to see a new service come from somewhere, and are they going to strike a deal with Viacom?
Yeah, and then there's this in the background, this whole dispute, not dispute, but this whole negotiation going on where Sumner Redstone, who is the owner of National Amusements, which is the majority shareholder in I know I've lost half of you already. The majority owner of CBS and Viacom, which are two separate companies, is toying around with merging them back together again. In case you didn't realize, they're no longer, CBS and Viacom used to be together. They're not anymore, but they're still majority owned by the same shareholder.
Yeah,
National Amusements just sounds like a company that owns roller coasters. I've always
thought. I think they did. I think that's how they started.
Probably.
Yeah.
Roller coasters and video games and arcades. And
right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thanks to all those who participate in our subreddit. If you got in there and submitted a story or voted on one, treat yourself to a sausage. Thank you. Submit stories and vote on them at dailytechnewsshow.reddit.com. All right. Accessibility is finally starting to get on a few people's radars. It isn't one thing, though. It's, can a blind person use your device? Can someone with low vision use your device? Two different approaches. Deaf people and hearing impaired, also two different approaches. Cognitive disabilities, motor disabilities. It's a diverse topic, and Shelly, I know you haven't gone after every aspect of it necessary in iOS Access for All, but you've covered a good swath of this. How do you approach such a diverse topic when talking with people?
Well, as far as accessibility goes, you're right that the way it sort of breaks down is by the kind of disability the user has. And so when I put the book together, the easiest thing to do was to create a chapter about each kind of accessibility user there was. So there's a chapter for blind users, a chapter for low vision users, a chapter for people with motor disabilities. But what that also let me do was approach it holistically from the point of view of that user. So instead of just going through all the steps of how to do a certain thing, I thought, well, if I'm a low vision user, what can I get out of iOS? What can I do with iOS based not only on the accessibility features that are out there, but the mainstream features that I can hack for my own use. And low vision is a good example because there are a lot of things you can do with the camera that are pretty awesome. If I'm a motor disabled person, I have a different set of issues because I'm having to connect switch peripherals to my device. And so thinking about the chapters individually in terms of what that user needs and also what's missing in terms of accessibility and what I can hack a little bit helped me not be so rigidly adhering to just what am I seeing in the accessibility settings pane. So I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of. And when I talk to users, I mean, I talk to blind folks and I talk to people with motor disabilities, and they have really different concerns, and they also have really different features that they use and really different approaches to using their devices. So that's kind of how I approached it.
What are some examples of features? And I know you wrote about iOS, but you're familiar with Android as well.
Sure.
What are some features that you wish either or both of those platforms would fix?
I think a real and honest to God dark mode would be number one. And I think that benefits people not only who are low vision, but who would just prefer higher contrast between text and background. So there are invert colors features in iOS and Android operating systems. And I should say devices have different low vision features, because the Samsung devices are different than the stock Android devices in some ways. And so just a consistent dark mode that would allow somebody to remain in that dark mode throughout everything they do and not have to flip back and forth because images are inverted, for example, or because there's an interface element that is light when you flip to invert colors or is dark when you're in normal mode.
You find that a lot of these, a lot of the problem with that is that, sure, there may be some baked in features in the OSs that handle the light dark mode, but you've also now got some third party apps that you want to use that conflict with that because they're by default one of those two, and it actually flips the other direction when you're doing invert and that sort of thing.
Right, that's a big part of it. And the app, for example, might have a sidebar interface that's dark and a main part of the interface that's light, and so that's always going to be a problem whichever side you're in. And a dark mode, hopefully, where the developer had actually responded to the interface guidelines for dark mode, would help a lot with that. And also just viewing the web and looking at images. If I'm in dark mode, all of my images are going to be reversed. And so I am very familiar and use the keyboard shortcuts many times a day to get out of invert mode so that I can see the smiling faces of people and all those pretty pictures on Facebook.
Do people still overlook accessibility when they're designing their apps? Not talking about the OS exactly, but apps so that they can work in these different modes.
I think they do. I think it's less of a problem now than it used to be. I think, and part of this is because I come from a low vision perspective, and so it may seem natural that I would start out saying, well, yeah, low vision is one of the contrast and color and font sizes are one of the things that are the least consistent. And so I think people know a lot of times to follow the interface guidelines as far as support for voiceover and switch control and labeling buttons for accessibility and that sort of things. But sometimes when they're designing an interface to look really pretty, and this is something that Apple was guilty of, but the third-party apps do in a different way. When they're designing the interface, their aesthetics for design are more important than accessibility in terms of either contrast or in terms of the readability of fonts. So that's a big one. And I think there are still apps out there that surprisingly will not completely label the interface for voiceover or switch control. And I say switch control, by the way, because support for voiceover means that you're supporting switch control in iOS because you're moving from element to element and the device knows that that element has a particular identity or function. So what'll happen is you'll have an interface that labels some buttons or maybe labels buttons on the main menu, but then when you dig in a little deeper, you'll hear button, 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 or the interface items won't be called out at all. So it's just sloppy programming in some cases. And then I think there are a category of developers that don't really think in terms of people with accessibility needs using their products. And so as I say, it's a lot less of a problem than it used to be, but you do find surprising instances where there's an app that somebody really wants to use and it is partially accessible. And I'll add quickly that another issue that happens is in that realm is that somebody will update their app and you've been using the app accessibly all along, and then the update breaks something accessibility. So somebody who may have depended on a particular app has to either contact the developer or just choose another app because the accessibility gets broken all the time.
So you mentioned a little bit about voice control, and I'm very curious about that because in my mind, I've got it way too simplified. I'm sure it's like, talking to it like the way we would with Siri, except maybe a few more functions. But what you just described sounds a lot more complicated than that. Is voice living up to its potential in terms of providing better accessibility for people who need it?
Well, I guess you have to take that apart a little bit because voice assistants like Siri and Alexa, those have accessibility implications themselves, because you can talk to your device and open apps, or in fact, you can open accessibility settings with voice. You can make your screen brighter or dimmer with voice. So that's great for somebody with a visual disability or motor disability. Home automation obviously is great because you can affect lights and thermostats and all the devices around your house that you either physically can't reach, or that, if, for example, if you're a blind person, you don't know whether the lights are on, so let's turn them all off. The other part of what we're with voice is actual use of voice to interact with the device, which is a different thing. So VoiceOver is a screen reader for the device, and the TalkBack is the Android version that allows me to hear the entire interface spoken to me. And that is what a lot of the early accessibility efforts focus mostly on, because making a screen reader, which creates an entire alternate set of gestures for operating your device, is a pretty big lift for an operating system developer. And so those were the first things that came along, VoiceOver and then later on TalkBack. And those systems are maturing in a way that's really awesome. You still find bugs, you still find limitations, you still find situations in which there might be easier ways to do things where a gesture is not keeping up with changes in the interface. But in general, the screen readers are a very mature function within mobile operating systems. And what's really great about them is that, unlike what used to be the case in desktop computing, these mobile operating systems include them from the get-go, so you don't have to buy them. For example, Windows users used to have to buy an expensive tool. It's still out there, called JAWS or Window Eyes, and those are commercial products that you had to add on to your device. And in the mobile world, that's just unheard of. You don't have to buy extra stuff unless you want to buy a voice that is pleasing to your ear, for example, and there are voices out there you can purchase, but you don't even have to do that, because Apple, for example, added some voices in iOS 10, and so you have more access to a wider range of voices that are easier for you to hear and more comfortable to you when you're listening to your documents read or your interface for your iPhone or Android device.
It does seem like companies are paying more attention to accessibility. In fact, when we had those announcements recently from Microsoft and Apple, they both led their announcement with videos about accessibility. Does that feel like a serious change and commitment, or is it more lip service from them?
I feel like showing the videos is lip service, but behind it, there actually is a lot of work going on. And both of those companies, Microsoft and Apple, have been getting better about accessibility all the time, and especially Microsoft. They have done a lot of things recently. They were laggards, and I think they really have stepped up. Unfortunately, from my point of view, the videos do sound like lip service, and frankly, they seem like they lull the people who don't normally pay attention to accessibility into a false sense that everything is okay.
Right.
And there's a tendency to write about accessibility as, number one, something that the company is doing for you as a favor, which is really just condescending and patronizing. And then there's a sense of people to receive that information as, oh, well, that's fine. We don't have to worry that blind folks or people with motor disabilities can't use devices because the companies have been magnanimous enough to create that. And so what I call for is not that we don't see videos. And the Apple video, I haven't seen the Microsoft video, and I need to go back and have a look at it. The Apple video was great because it actually showed a number of accessibility features in action. And I think you can't underestimate the value of letting people see how accessibility works. But the problem is that when they introduced an actual new feature for their MacBook Pros later in the presentation, the Touch Bar, there was no reference to how and whether it's accessible. Now, it's Apple, and the chances are pretty good that you're going to get accessibility, and the Touch Bar will be accessible. But we don't know that as users who are paying attention to accessibility. And that's a real big problem that all the companies have when they introduce new products. It's not reasonable to expect that they should do full-on accessibility demos, and I wouldn't suggest that. But the two things that they really should be doing is when they introduce new features, they should do like the Apple presenters always do and look meaningfully at the audience and say, and it's VoiceOver compatible. And that would go a long way. The second thing they need to do is when they have hands-on demonstrations or when they bring people in to look at products, whether from the journalism community or just people who are evaluating products after they're released, they need to make sure that people who know about accessibility and who use it on a regular basis are there and are able to provide public comment so that when an Apple Watch comes out or a new Android Wear watch or some product that is completely new, that we have the ability to find out whether it's accessible before we go and lay our hands on the device and buy it, and then somebody releases the clarion call on Twitter and says, I figured it out, the watch is accessible. And that's just not a good way to communicate about accessibility if you actually intend to be known as a company that does a full holistic job of providing accessibility to all users.
Yeah, that should be part of an announcement, not a piece of investigative journalism.
Yeah. I can see how it would be difficult for some of these companies to always, in the design process, have every possible accessibility question in mind and therefore an answer to it. But of all of the major companies that are building mobile devices for us and mobile experiences, whether that be through hardware and software or both, who's really leading the charge, or is anyone like a standout? Can people listening to the show hear a name that they go, oh, okay, well, they're on the forefront of this, and therefore I should, look into their products maybe before I look into others?
I think Apple has been. I don't know that they're maintaining their lead as widely as they had in the past, but Apple absolutely was at the forefront when mobile devices became a thing. And when the iPhone 3GS, I'll point out that for the first 2 years of the iPhone, there was no accessibility. But when the 3GS came out in 2009, Apple took a great leap forward in terms of putting voiceover and then later other accessibility features on, because they didn't do it all at once. And I don't think it's fair to expect that they would have all of those things fully baked at once, but they did start it. I think that what's happening now is that Android has come a long way. Google has come a long way with Android. Microsoft has come a long way. They have the advantage of having a mature operating system on which to base their accessibility. So instead of a mobile operating system that they're trying to hack accessibility onto, you have Windows that, frankly, was always the most accessible desktop operating system, whether it was by purchasing an external screen reader or whether it was through some of the limited capabilities that Microsoft had within the operating system. So they have a good basis to build on. And then, as I hinted at earlier, Microsoft is actually making some efforts to go out into the accessibility community and communicate better and find out what folks need. And it's not perfect, but I feel like Apple still leads, but they should watch their acts.
Well, the book from Shelly is called iOS Access for All. So if you're interested in that, head over to iosaccessbook.com. We've got some other links for other resources that we'll put in our show notes at dailytechnewsshow.com as well. Any of these you want to point out particularly, Shelly?
I want to say something about Apple Viz, because they are a great community resource. Not only will you find out what's new in the Apple operating system, all of them, Mac as well as iOS and watchOS and tvOS, but they have a compendium of app reviews. They determine whether they're accessible. So if you are interested in an app and wonder whether it's accessible, go over to Apple Viz and they'll probably know one way or another, and you can save yourself a couple of bucks. Also, there's a guy named Christopher Hills who has a YouTube channel with a lot of great videos about how he uses switch control on Mac and iOS. He's a real advocate, and I think switch control is one of those features that for many people, seeing is better than reading as far as learning how that works. So those are the two I'd highlight. I guess the third one, just because we were talking about Apple, and at the announcement last month, Apple did highlight their quote-unquote new accessibility site. It's not a new site, but they really have added a lot of things to apple.com/accessibility. And that was one of my other beefs, is that they didn't say the URL out loud. Come on, guys, really? But you will find a lot of information there, not only about what the accessibility tools within Apple products are, but a lot of third-party accessibility apps and hardware devices that folks connect to their Apple computers and mobile devices. So those, and I would encourage you, though, to go to the whole list that I sent Tom, because I think there actually are some really good resources out on the web.
Yeah, there's some good links in here for Android users and Microsoft users as well. Let's finish off with a pick of the day. A while back, we asked folks to send in their favorite VPN providers. We've got a whole list we're working our way through. Our next recommendation comes from Willie Scott, a.k.a. WScottus1, in chat. He writes, if you have a Raspberry Pi and at least 5 megabits per second upload speed, then pivpn.io might be the solution for you. PI like private eye, pivpn.io. It's very simple to set up, literally a one-line bash script you enter into the terminal, and then you follow the instructions on screen. You can even use it on iOS and Android with the OpenVPN app. He's got some notes on that I'll put in our show notes as well. He also sent along a video, link to a video on YouTube that walks you through the steps, and he says, sounds like a lot, but it really isn't, and the best part is it's free. If you don't have PI or fast internet at home, Then Tunnel Bear is my favorite. He throws that in as an alternate, tunnelbear.com. Thank you, Willie Scott, for sending that along. Appreciate it.
Yeah, 2 first names.
Send your picks to us, folks. Feedback at dailytechnewsshow.com. You can find more picks at dailytechnewsshow.com/picks. Shelly Brisbin, I can't tell you what a pleasure it was to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it, and you helped me get over my fear of video.
Oh, good. Hooray. It's a happy side effect as well.
Yeah.
I know we've mentioned it a couple of times, but iOS Access for All, iosaccessbook.com. Anything else to tell folks about it?
Sure. Well, I do a podcast called The Parallel, where I get tech people together from both the mainstream and accessibility community, and I get them to talk to one another instead of about themselves to themselves. So that's at parallelpodcast.com, and season 2 is just getting started, and I hope people will check it out and maybe learn a little bit about accessibility in the context of technology, but that is not mainly what we talk about. So hope people will listen to that.
Check it out, folks. Scott Johnson, anything from you before we get out of here?
Oh, nothing big. Back from BlizzCon. That means all of the game shows that I have that are Blizzard related, be it the Instance or Core or Rally Point, have a ton of new content that we got there on the show floor and in interviews. So if you're into that stuff or just want to hear our live episode from Saturday night at BlizzCon at the Hilton, you can check all that out. Links and details for all the shows they're in at frogpants.com/podcasts.
Thanks to everybody who supports the show in any way you wish. There are so many ways you can find out at dailytechnewsshow.com/support. Of course, we get our main source of funding from patreon.com/DTNS. Welcome to new patrons, Rathan and Brett Martin, who are joining the 4,000 plus of you that make this show possible. Thank you, Rathan and Brett. Don't forget, if you haven't yet, to submit your favorite segment of the year to bit.ly/bestofdtns so Roger can put together our best of show for the end of the year. Our email address, if you need that, is feedback@dailytechnewsshow.com. We're live Monday through Friday, 4:30 p.m. Eastern at alphageekradio.com and diamondclub.tv, and our website is dailytechnewsshow.com. Back tomorrow with Justin Robert Young. Talk to you then.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Get more at frogpants.com.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Great show, you guys.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Good.
Thanks.
I thought so too.
Yeah.
What should we call it?
Well, Roger, give us some examples.
Roger may have be. Are you headed out of here, Roger?
Robots have him too.
Oh, we lost him.
Oh, well. He'll be
Robots,
back in a second.
robots.
If you go to showbot.tv, though, you can play along. If you're
I'll do the
watching along.
titles. I'll do the titles, and then I'll Bominos.
Okay, cool.
Top is Quadcopter. Fetch me a sausage. With a name like Flash, it's got to be good. Siri, can you hear me? Hackception.
These are good ones today.
Siri plays a mean pinball.
Nice.
Malware, the wild things are. These aren't the droids you're legislating for. A voice of approval from the robots. Back in a Flash chat.
A lot of flash in there, yeah.
Australia has a sausage party.
Oh, geez.
Australia actually is a sausage party.
They
A
do love
sausage
their
party.
sizzle. Yeah.
The secret of my access.
These are good today.
Bringing a voice to accessibility.
I like the secret of my access. That's a really
No,
good
that's
one.
a good one. I like that one.
So
I'll vote for it.
I do the Mac Accessibility Roundtable podcast, and we try to come up with titles from the show, from things we've said, but we're actually the people talking, and we can never remember any because
Oh, yeah.
we're like too busy yapping. And
That's where
No,
good to
that's
have
the
a
beauty of
awesome
this live
audience.
audience, man.
Yeah.
All right, I need to go and get my
All right.
eyeballs something.
Go check your eyeballs.
Good luck
See
with your
manana.
Tell your eye doctor hello for us.
Well, this is actually the specialist, so it's the
Oh,
first
the
time I've seen him.
specialist. Okay.
All right.
Good luck. Talk to you
See
soon.
manana.
Yeah, so it's vote-wise, it's between Quadcopter, Fetch Me a Sausage, and The Secret of My Access. Secret of My Access, of course, relates to the main topic, which always gives a title a little bit of a boost.
Yeah, it gives it extra points.
Although Quadcopter, Fetch Me a Sausage.
It's
it's
pretty
so
good.
long. It's hilarious, but it's so long for Twitter.
It's a little long, yeah.
I think Secret of My Access is pretty solid.
All right, are we unanimous on that?
No points for the top one though, because it's funny and I loved it.
It is fun.
Shelly, do you have you cast your vote yet?
Not officially, but I can. Secret of my access is fine.
All right. Let's do it. Good
I took
work.
off my I voted sticker.
Dark Redeemer gets the W. W Scottus one had a good game though. He had a chat mention and had the pick of the day. So
How many folks tend to be in your chat on a normal day?
a couple hundred. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Hello, chatters.
W Scottus one is calling Dark Redeemer to concede. He says, "Lovely."
Let's bring the chat. Oh, never mind. I'll shut up.
Yeah.
I was going to say, let's bring the chat
Pretty
together.
Pretty good.
They're already together. See, they did it all their
Yep.
own. Good work, everybody.
Pretty good.
Talking out of my access. Okay. Shane.
I don't even know what that means.
Shane was giving some good commentary in the chat. Let me see if I can find it so I don't get it wrong. He was talking about Apple sending reps to schools and such, but I think his wife teaches. He says, my wife has low vision, teaches blind and visually impaired kids in public school. They all find iOS and Siri to be a godsend.
Oh, yeah. It's easy to teach teachers as well. I've actually done presentations with people who do that, who TVIs, and they are not necessarily tech experts themselves. So that if you could get them on board, then it's easy. And the kids often will have an iPad in the house. So if the TVI knows how to use it, if the parent has an iPad,
then yeah,
it works.
then you're lucky for sure. They're asking you if you want to join them in chat. It's irc.chatrealm.net.
Damn it! What kind of a client do I need for that? All right,
You can just use web.
Okay. It's been so long since I've done IRC. I feel old now. All right, say again.
irc.chatrealm.net.
All right.
Chat realm, no E at the end. It's just realm.
Oh, okay. Now I need a name. That's me. Man. There we go. Hello, chatty people.
I think Shelly should come on again.
There she is.
You were great.
Yay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'd love to come back, and it's funny because I have listened to the show on and off, but I've been listening to it for the past week and a half and having fun with it. So
good. I'm glad.
I feel like I get the rhythm a little bit. That was my thing. I want to make sure I got the rhythm.
You fit right in. It was great.
Yep.
And we wouldn't even have to talk accessibility necessarily. It'd be great to just have you on.
Please don't.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to stereotype you.
What's hilarious is I never did any accessibility stuff until about 4 years ago. And I was always like the low vision person working in the mainstream world, which was what I was really happy about. And then I had started doing accessibility, and then people started coming to me and they said, Shelly, you really ought to branch out and try and cover some mainstream. Oh my God.
Like, look at my last 2 decades of work.
That's why I always mention 15 books, hundreds of articles, blah, blah, blah. Mac user, blah, blah.
No,
blah.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I tried to make that point at the beginning of the show as well.
That's the misconceptions about accessibility stuff are always like a thing,
Well, and it's that balance. Like, I wanted to have you on to talk about your book because you have a book, and that's cool to tell people about, but also because we haven't done a show with main topic being accessibility in a while, and so I was like, this is a great opportunity. But that doesn't mean every time you come on, that's what you have to have, because what will happen is naturally, if it's meant to, if it's related to a story, and that's even more valuable, I think.
But see, and I kind of botched it, but that's kind of the premise of my podcast. The parallel is I get 2 guests in. One is a mainstream. I know a lot of, editors, journalist type folks from the mainstream tech world. And then I get somebody who covers accessibility in some way. And I threw out a topic. Like last week we did parenting. So it's not an accessibility topic.
Right.
We talk about parenting. And then one of the people I had on was a woman who does WCAG accessibility testing by day, but she's a mom. She's a blind woman. She's mom of a 14-year-old kid. And the other person I had was somebody I know from my days at Mac User. And it was about 40 minutes before Ricky said, well, as a blind mom, blah, blah, blah. And we talked a little bit about that. I asked one question about accessibility, but it was a context thing. And I just believe in that. So, and nobody else was doing it. And I finally figured out the only way I was going to make that point is to have a show. Yeah. So that's what I do. So,
no, that's great, because I think it has more impact that way too. Because and not that what we did today isn't valuable, and I think a lot of people with the chat room were saying they were getting a lot out of it. But there's a different way you approach a topic when you know that that's the topic, right?
Right. And you focus on it differently. And like I say, one of my big complaints about the way accessibility is thought of is either that it's sort of patronized or that it's assumed to be something that you don't have to talk about because it's all perfect, it's all done.
Right.
And so, and also it doesn't come up in context. Like if a new product comes out, whether the company has made a big deal about talking about it in their presentation, nobody out there is going to write about, well, the Apple Watch happens to be accessible unless Apple has mentioned that specifically. It's not, or there'll be like a massive review of the new operating system release and the accessibility features won't even be covered.
Yeah.
I read 600 pages about accessibility, but most reviews of products don't even mention it. So
I mean, that should be part of your scoring somehow. Yeah. It would be great. And again, there's different needs for a cognitive disability versus low vision. I get that. So boiling it down to 1-star rating doesn't seem fair, but at the same time, that would be better than no star rating at all, at least.
Well, but it's I don't know if scoring and reviews is even that much of a thing as it used to be. I know. No,
it's just a way to make sure that it's covered, right? To justify your stars, you have to look at it and then write about it. And I think that's, Well, certainly for app reviews and things like that and there's a chapter in the back of the book that's nothing but app reviews that are just based on, number one, is it a good app? And number two, is it accessible? Because people always say, okay, what's the best accessible Twitter client? What's the best productivity tool, or what's this or that, the other thing? And so I just made a list of about 100 of them, and they weren't all out of my brain. You talk to a lot of people, and so I didn't rate them necessarily, but I said, okay, you can use Calendar in iOS, but Fantastical is a better calendar, and it's also accessible. So and that's incredibly valuable. Is that on a web page somewhere?
It's in the book.
It's in the book.
It's chapter 9.
Got it. Get the book, people.
Good to know. I have Fantastical. I'm happy I'm supporting that then. I like them a lot.
And that's the funny thing. Like people don't know, and there's no way they would know. And I was going to mention this, and I'm kind of glad we didn't because it's a little controversial and would have taken a while. But there was actually a move to have Apple require developers to indicate whether their product was accessible in the App Store, or for somehow Apple to evaluate that. And as a blunt force thing, that's kind of too much. But on the other hand, as a checkbox that the developer could select him or herself, that's not a bad idea. And there's a tool out there called Accessibility Checker for Accessibility Scanner, I think it's called, for Android, and that doesn't exist on iOS. And that was another thing I was going to bring up, is like in iOS, it would be great if a developer could run his app through that thing and get some guidance on first voiceover compatibility, contrast and color, and that sort of stuff. I'd love a thing
like an HTML checker, right?
Exactly. Yeah. That was the comparison I was going to make. And I asked one of my Android friends earlier today, is accessibility scanner any good? And I haven't heard back from him, so I don't know if it is. I know it exists, but I just, as a caveat, it came out earlier this year. But there's nothing like that on iOS as far as I know.
Yeah, because I could see there being an argument to say that actually getting people using it is going to be better than some kind of automated process at this point. But at least and that's true of HTML scanners too, right? Sometimes you're like, no, I made that mistake on purpose, and you need a pair of human eyes to look at it. But but some of having a tool that will point out things to you,
start somewhere.
It saves people time, and it would maybe pay attention when they wouldn't have otherwise, because they just thought it was going to take too much time.
Well, there are whole companies whose business is evaluating the accessibility of websites.
Right.
A lot of times that's for compliance with government regs and stuff like that. And they have accessibility checkers that they run, but then they have to go through and do actual exhaustive testing. And so that's the comparison I would make, is that you have an app out there that's not going to make it 100% accessible. And some developer somewhere is going to say, well, I ran it through the accessibility checker. It's not my fault.
Right.
But a lot of them, especially the small developers, are really good. And Twitter is kind of amazing for this, because people will reach out to a developer by Twitter and get a response. And you don't even have to do it publicly. It's not a matter of shaming them. It's a matter of saying, hey, do you know, and I always encourage people to do this. I say, do you know that your app lacks accessibility? Not, how dare your app not be accessible? It's a different, so we give guidance to people that way.
A little bit of a softer approach.
Yeah, and then every once in a while you have to be a little grumpy. And then you'll have an app that's mostly accessible, but there's one thing, like Slack had a scrolling bug. So instead of reading with voiceover from the top of the conversation to the bottom, it did the reverse. It was accessible otherwise. You could see all the buttons, you could read the messages, but it was irritating. And so Slack in general had accessibility issues, and they had been trying for a really long time to hire an accessibility engineer lead. And I believe they've done that. And I mentioned Slack because they fixed that bug. They finally fixed it. It was a really long time coming. Yeah, I mean, there's always somebody out there who's either there's some that are just recalcitrant. There's some that just won't answer.
Yeah.
And then and if you spend enough time around Apple Viz, around blind Twitter, you kind of know who are the people who are really responsive. And sometimes they get points with users for that, even if their app might not be the absolute top of the heap, but it's pretty good. It's like, well, they're really responsive as far as accessibility. I'm going to give them my business for that.
Paying attention.
Yeah.
Tensor Guy says, Shelly has Android friends? I knew she was in with the robots.
Those people. One of my good buddies just wrote an Android book. That's on my resource list, by the way. It's called Getting Started with Android. It's specifically for blind users, although the title doesn't say that. And I realized all the resources I said out loud were Apple ones. I didn't mean to do that.
Occupational hazard. You worked at Mac User, right?
There's Android stuff. There's one. The Microsoft one is just a Microsoft accessibility site, but it's a good site. So.
One question we didn't get to what is there a feature you think people would be surprised exists?
One of my favorites it's called Speak Screen. It's in iOS, and if you're not a VoiceOver user but you would like your iOS device to read aloud to you, you can enable Speak Screen, and then when you come up with a document that you would like to have read aloud to you, you do a 2-finger flick downward, and it'll read that document. And so it doesn't bother you unless you're using it. And in iOS 10, they added a highlight under it so you can see what line you're. And so a lot of people I know who don't have visual impairment for whatever reason might want to hear something read aloud. And I'll tell one of my favorite jokes about every time you see an article about the 10 secret features of iOS, at least half of them are in the accessibility settings pane. It's like it's a secret because nobody ever goes in there.
Yeah. No, I've noticed that myself actually. Yeah. What I've seen those it's usually all the hidden menus, and accessibility is always one of those hidden menus. It's totally
hidden right there under general.
Yeah,
it's not there easy to find at all.
Well, because nobody goes into general. Dark Redeemer is pointing out, one of the problems is if the developer does a cost-benefit analysis, they may not think it's worth spending the extra time or money to make something accessible. Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, there's the software and the hardware. The software is you probably don't know that there are people out there who want to use your tools because they don't use them now because they're not accessible. And if it's an app developer, it's kind of an easier case to make because it's a smaller development hit load, and frankly it's a smaller dollar value product, and so you say to somebody, you know how simple it is to add this feature. But if Microsoft is let's pick big company X. I'm not going to shame anybody, but
sure.
Big company X makes an office suite or something, and you say, what would be great is if your spreadsheet program were accessible, and you can't even get to the people that you want to get to have that conversation. But if I have a calendar app and I say, it would be great, it would be if your reminder function was accessible, then the guy who wrote it may very well write you back. And the harder sell on that is for apps that are oriented toward productivity and they're used in business, a lot of times there are government regs about accessibility, and you can say to people, look, if you want your product to be considered as on a government contract or a business that deals with the government and has to meet some accessibility requirements, it would behoove you to become accessible. And frankly, that's why a lot of companies like Apple and Microsoft, that is some of their motivation to become accessible.
And that we tend to want to say, oh, they're only doing it because they have to, but that's the way companies do almost everything that they do. So if it gets the right thing done, I'm not going to blame them for doing the right thing. They're
doing well by doing good. I mean, that's as old as business itself, and Apple has used that to their PR benefit, and which is like opening your event that people perceive to be lackluster with an accessibility video does really feel like softening up the crowd. I mean, I'm sorry, it just does. It was a great video. It was well done, and this is from my perspective. Somebody had to point out to me that if you saw that video, you have all these scenes of people using accessibility, including a woman who is using a headboard switch assembly device of some kind. And at the end, you find out that she is the one that's editing the video. And that was the hook for people. I didn't realize that was the hook. I was like, oh, there's a woman editing video. She's using switch control because I'm living in the weeds. That's like, to me, that's just perfectly sensible, right?
No, that's interesting. Because what hit me when Apple did it was like, oh, Microsoft did this yesterday. This is very interesting. This is becoming the new trend for companies to tout their accessibility.
I do need to go back and watch the Microsoft thing because I knew they had done it, but I had not gone back. And then the same week, they had a big confab with a bunch of World Blind Union people, and they actually brought a bunch of people, and some people I know, in to talk about accessibility over all of the Microsoft products, Office and the hardware as well as Windows. And it was really cool, and it builds goodwill, but it also gives people the opportunity to feel like they're being heard about accessibility. And I'm not saying that Apple doesn't do things like that. Apple just doesn't talk about it.
Well, that's their culture, right? They never talk about anything.
Which is really irritating because they get so much PR mileage about how they cover accessibility in the videos, and every once in a while they'll focus on either an employee of Apple that is blind or disabled in some way, or more often a user, but they never are seen to be opening the gates to let people come in. And I always say this, and people are like, Shelly, you know Apple, come on. And I say, yeah, but I still have to say it. It's incumbent upon me to
doesn't mean you
expect
you
more
excuse them.
I don't excuse them, and I don't think that my invitation to Cupertino is coming in the mail tomorrow, but it's
mine either.
And I've met some lovely people who work in accessibility at Apple. They have a group that focuses on that, and they do a lot of testing, and they take a lot of feedback from people. And it would be unfair to say that it just happens in a vacuum, but that's not the way they want to message what they're doing. And because their messaging is so soft and so inspiration porny. Inspiration porn, if you haven't heard it, is a term of art in accessibility.
I had not heard it, but I get it immediately.
Right. And Apple does very pretty inspiration porn.
Yeah.
But they soft pedal, like they're among the better ones at not making it sound just really syrupy and drippy. But like to me, so here's how I watch an Apple event. So let's say it's the Apple Watch announcement. So the watch is coming, and you're waiting to see the watch, and you're trying to figure out, looking at your computer or TV screen, I wonder if that's accessible. I wonder how they're going to do it. Will there be a comment about whether it's accessible? Mm-hmm. And then it ends, and you go off with your podcast friends, and you go to do Mac Accessibility Roundtable, and we all sit around, and I'm the only person in Mac Accessibility Roundtable that has vision. And so they always ask me, Shelly, can you tell by looking at it, do you think it has any sort of accessibility features? Does it have low vision contrast? I was like, I don't know. It's tiny.
Yeah.
And that's the way we experience these events sometimes, because Apple hasn't found a way, whether on the stage or whether in the event's aftermath, to effectively message accessibility. And because a lot of people have been burned, people get panicky. And I'm not one of those people, because I've both as a journalist and somebody who's been doing this for a really long time, and having had a lot of experience with Apple, I'm reasonably sure that it's going to address accessibility in some way. I just don't know specifically how it's going to do it. But there are a lot of people out there.
They just put it in the press release, right? I mean, that.
Well, sure. And they don't even really focus on it. This brand new accessibility site, which is what they call it, the apple.com accessibility. There's not a place up there that says, let me show you how the touch bar works with VoiceOver.
Yeah.
Why couldn't they do that video? It'd take 5 minutes. Well, it wouldn't take 5 minutes, but it would be 5-minute video.
Right.
Just simple stuff like that. But that is outside of the way Apple messages stuff. And, and like I say, I talk more about Apple than I do Google or Microsoft, but I think they have the same problem without a lot of the baggage of Apple's sort of reputation and corporate culture. Mm-hmm. I mean, they have their own issues, but and I haven't really dug, but I have the sense, like I say, that when they get people from the community involved, Apple and Google, especially Microsoft and Google, but especially Microsoft, are a little more willing to let that be the story. So the people that went to those events did sign NDAs, I believe. I haven't talked to them. They haven't told me their secrets, but they are allowed to say they went. There are a lot of times when people are involved with Apple that they may or may not be able to even indicate that they've been in contact with Apple. So that's unfortunate.
Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thank
This
you.
was great.
Thank you for letting me talk your ear off.
Of course. It was good stuff.
I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Absolutely. We will definitely figure that out and have you back. And everybody watching live, thanks for hanging out. Everybody watching on demand, thanks also for hanging out at a different time. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.